We all know it. As the new year approaches, the feeling creeps in that with the new year comes the time for big changes. Maybe you've set yourself some pretty big goals for the new year. And maybe you've been achieving them successfully for a while. But only for a while. And then suddenly the old patterns are back. What remains is frustration and the question of why we often set big goals only to give them up a little later. To clarify this question, let's try a little thought experiment. In our experiment, there is an ice cube in a freezer. The subject's only task is to melt it by turning up the temperature with a regulator. The subjects know exactly how to operate a thermostat, and they also know that there is a key moment at 0 degrees when the ice cube starts to melt very quickly. It is this knowledge that motivates them to get on with the task. But what the volunteers don't know is the starting temperature in the freezer. And then there's the annoying rule that the thermostat can only be raised 1 degree every day. So, after the initial motivation, disillusionment creeps in as nothing happens for many days in a row. And after a few days, most people give up in frustration. This example is a powerful illustration of how, intuitively, we seem to take a completely wrong approach to achieving our goals. We tend to focus on key moments and want far too much, preferably immediately. We do not consider that the melting point of 0 degrees is not a major event, or the result of a major upheaval, but merely the sum of many small degrees that were necessary to reach the melting point. And this is where so-called habits come into play. Can you imagine that it is possible to achieve everything you want with little effort and time? There are countless guidebooks that offer concrete strategies. In our opinion, however, the best book which we have summarized here for you in a short, concise and understandable way is Atomic Habits or the 1% Method by James Clear.
We all use habits more or less consciously every day. Let's say you walk into a dark room. You probably don't think twice and instinctively reach for the light switch. Switching on the light is a habit. It is an action that you have repeated so many times that it has become automatic. This habit started with a trigger, a specific stimulus that made you want to change something. In our example, it is darkness and the desire to see. At some point in your life, you found an answer to this in the form of a concrete response. Namely, the flicking of a light switch. The final step is the ultimate goal of the habit, the reward. In our example, this is the relief of no longer being in the dark. This reward occurs in our brain through the release of dopamine, better known as the happiness hormone. It is released when we experience things that are important for our survival. So it is a motivator that is essential for survival. It makes us feel good, and that motivates us to repeat the action over and over again. In the process, repetition creates a link between the trigger and the response, and these actions become quite automatic over time. The new habit is born.
Unfortunately, we have a lot of habits that are not as useful as turning on a light switch to improve your vision. For example, if you are studying and your phone is next to you and it is vibrating, you feel the urge to see who has texted you. You reach for your phone, and as a reward, you get to read the message. Dopamine is released and you feel good. But of course, this prevents you from concentrating on your studies. However, no one should be ashamed of these actions because, biologically speaking, bad behavior is actually perfectly normal and even healthy Homo sapiens behavior. Although our society and the world we live in have changed drastically over the last 1,000 years, evolution has been rather slow and our brains have hardly evolved at all. We are creatures with highly optimized instincts, but unfortunately optimized for a time-long past. It used to make sense to consume as many calories as possible. And it used to make perfect sense to focus on the immediate rather than planning for the future.
That's why we often don't take these small actions seriously enough in the moment. What difference does it make if I eat something unhealthy? The answer is quite clear. It doesn't make much difference at the moment. You probably won't be overweight tomorrow. However, if this behavior is repeated every day, it can have a big impact over time. To better understand the cumulative effect of many small fatal decisions, let's play a mental game. Imagine a plane taking off from Frankfurt for New York. The pilot inadvertently changes course by a few degrees. The nose of the plane turns less than a meter. No one, not the passengers and not the pilot himself, notices the change in course. And yet, the tiny maneuver will make itself felt during the long flight. At the end of the flight, the plane arrives in Washington instead of New York. The moral of the story? We do not immediately notice the effects of small changes. But if they are repeated, they become habits and can really change our lives in the long run, taking us in a completely different direction. So it's all about the daily 1% that, over time, will add up to 100% or even 0. To put it in positive terms, if you take something and do it regularly with the help of a habit, and improve it by just 1% each time without much effort, then after a year it will be 37 times as good. This insight becomes really impressive when we look at our past. If you had spent just 30 minutes a day learning a new language for the last 5 years, you would have put in just a little effort every day and still be able to speak that language really well. So you see, we don't need a key moment or a great upheaval, which we are not evolutionarily made for anyway. What we are very well made for, however, is to use our brains to manipulate these biological processes. And this is the author's sobering insight. Achieving one's goals is not a question of iron discipline, but of systems.
But how do we best adopt these systems in the form of good habits? To develop and maintain a good habit, it must obey 4 laws. It must be obvious, simple, attractive, and above all, satisfying. Let's start with the obvious. Every habit needs a trigger, as we have already learned. So to integrate a good habit, clearly define a new trigger for yourself. For example, if you decide to do some exercise in the morning, define exactly where and at what time you will do it. Most importantly, this new trigger must be obvious because our environment has a drastic effect on our behavior. The more visible it is, the more likely you are to respond to it and develop an intention to do it. For example, you can place your gym clothes in a visible place next to your bed the night before. To ensure that you stick to your new habit, it is advisable not to be too ambitious, which brings us to the second law of keeping the habit as simple as possible. The less effort you put into it, the more likely you are to want to do it. So simply break down the habit you want to integrate into small chunks, and only get into the habit of the first chunk at first. In our example, it's enough to concentrate on putting on your sports clothes. A great side effect: each of these small habit units is another door opener, because once you have put on your sports clothes, you may automatically want to do sports. In order for the habit to favor the evolutionary release of dopamine and thus satisfy the last two laws of attractiveness and satisfaction, we now simply link the unpleasant action to another more pleasant action and thus use the immediate reward as motivation. The exciting thing is that we feel the satisfying feelings of happiness even when we are just thinking about these pleasant activities, because our neural reward system does not distinguish between desire and fulfillment. In our example, not only can you reward yourself with something pleasurable of your choice while you are exercising, but you can also hold out the prospect of a reward that you will receive after you have successfully completed the exercise. Once we have successfully integrated a habit into our everyday life, we can use another trick and make the new habit the trigger for the next desired habit. For example, you can always eat a healthy breakfast with fruit after your morning workout. In this way, one habit builds on the next, and you can develop whole routines. For those who want to take it a step further, what about making a big announcement to your friends that you are now exercising every morning, or joining others in the same endeavor? As social creatures, we value the opinions of those around us. So involving other people in our plans can make us want to prove ourselves to them and stick to the habit. And if we have bad habits that we want to get rid of, there are some very simple tricks we can use to get rid of them. Just change the trigger, increase the effort, or link the habit to an unpleasant activity. For example, you could put your mobile phone away or hand it to someone close when you are about to exercise.
To help you apply what you have learned, think about and write down the following 6 questions. First, which habits should I get rid of and which ones do I want to have? Second, which of the habits I wrote down is most important to me? Third, what units can I break down this habit into? Fourth, when and where exactly do I want to do this action? Fifthly, where do I want to place the trigger for this action, and what interfering triggers can I remove and how? And sixth, what reward do I set for this action? You will soon realize that it is not so difficult to change your life for the better by taking small steps in the right direction. And yes, we all know that sometimes it can be super demotivating when you don't see results in real time. But if we focus less on the goal and more on the system behind it, we stand a good chance of achieving everything we want in the long run. And there is one thing we must never forget. Accepting ourselves for what we are and using that to our advantage is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom.